All right, here we go. So as always, we like to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have presence and deep connection with the lands on and near the Oak Ridges Moraine as part of what is known to the Indigenous peoples of North America as Turtle Island. These lands are the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the First Nations of the Williams Treaties. We would like to thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. Indigenous peoples have been subjected to colonial oppression and injustice, which continues to this day. The Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust acknowledges that the first step to reconciliation and recognizing Indigenous peoples and their inherent rights to the land, which will ensure that we are creating a better future by strengthening our relationship with them and the land. Our land trust endeavors to honor the land and its treaties by ensuring healthy ecosystems that thrive forever. We recognize that working together with Indigenous peoples to include ecological traditional knowledge systems moves us towards an equitable and sustainable future. So what is the land trust? We are a nonprofit organization that can acquire interests in land, like conservation easements, for the purpose of conservation. We raise funds to either purchase land or arrange conservation easements with landowners to protect ecological features. We also receive donations of land and easements, which require us to protect these lands forever. We take direct action to protect ecologically valuable land on and near the moraine for today and future generations. Landowners who do choose to pursue conservation easements with us will get significant tax benefits in addition to having their land protected from any kind of encroachment or development forever. So the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust as an organization, currently we protect 5,073 acres across the moraine between 66 properties. The work we do supports climate change resiliency by protecting ecosystem services like flood control by maintaining wetlands. The protected lands support species at risk habitat, and the work we do ensures that biodiversity and environmental heritage are conserved forever. So why do we do it? We envision that natural environments are important to sustaining life, and we would like to ensure that they are protected forever. We believe that we need healthy ecosystems to survive. Endangered, at-risk, or other native species deserve protected habitat, and future generations should have the same opportunities to enjoy the world as we know it today and all the species that we see today. So join our growing community of landowners and supporters who are leaving a legacy for the future. So as you can see on this map, the Oak Ridges Moraine is that light green strip that goes across the greenbelt. It's almost entirely within the greenbelt. All the yellow dots you see are conservation easements, which are pretty widespread across the moraine, and the red dots are nature reserves. So you can see just how broad our reach has been so far as of 2022. So currently we're exploring an exciting new initiative. We've just joined it recently, the Kirtland's Warbler Project, or KIWA. It's a new initiative we've joined. So the Kirtland's warbler is endangered due to breeding habitat loss, pine oak savannas, which are also home to other species at risk in Ontario and all of North America. The good news is that in June 2022, 5 male Kirtland warblers were discovered just north of the moraine in Simcoe, proving that if you build and restore their habitats, they will return. The project goal is to protect a total of 400 acres of land to restore pine oak savannas in the Oak Ridges Moraine over the next 5 to 10 years. We would like to establish at least 125 native species to support habitat and stabilize the Kirtland's warbler populations in not just Canada, but all of North America. If you're interested in supporting or volunteering, you can contact Aileen Barclay, who is our program director, or you can sign up on our website to be a volunteer. Here are just a few upcoming webinars and events we are doing. You can become a member with us. You can donate, volunteer, or join these events. Our next webinar is next week on Tuesday. It's Nature Exposure and Human Health with Beth Foster. She's a forest bathing expert. You can also check out our website or our social medias if you're interested. So now I'll get to why we're all here today to learn about wetlands. We've joined with Ontario Streams to deliver this webinar today. So Ontario Streams was established in 1995. They're an environmental charity dedicated to the conservation and rehabilitation of streams and wetlands through education and community involvement. Ontario Streams leads habitat restoration projects across the GTA to ensure and protect aquatic ecosystems, and they're always happy to have community members get involved in volunteering opportunities. Our speaker today on behalf of Ontario Streams is Kat Lucas. Kat graduated from the University of Guelph with a Bachelor of Science, Zoology, and a Master of Environmental Science with a focus on aquatic toxicology and fish reproduction. She is currently enrolled in a Certificate of Community Development, Engagement, and Leadership from Toronto Metropolitan University. Kat has previously worked at 2 nonprofit organizations where she developed and delivered environmental education programming for students and community members. Kat is excited to bring her passion for conservation, education, and connecting others with the environment to Ontario Streams as the Outreach and Communications Coordinator. So everybody, please help me and give a warm welcome to Kat Lucas from Ontario Streams. I'll let Kat take it away.
All right, thank you, Serena. I will start sharing my screen. There we go. So we're really happy that you could join us tonight for this wonderful World of Wetlands webinar. We've got lots of information to share about our urban wetlands, how they are doing right now, different kinds of wetlands that we have, and the ways that we can protect them. As Serena said, I'm Kat, and I work as the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for Ontario Streams, which is a small environmental charity based in Aurora on the Oak Ridges Moraine. And our mission is to promote the protection and rehabilitation of Ontario streams, rivers, and wetlands through education and community action. So tonight, by having you attend this webinar, we're focusing on that education portion of our mission, where hopefully you learn lots of new things. And we do have a pretty big crowd tonight, so it seems very timely to be talking about wetlands. As many of us have seen in the news, there's been some policy changes, and maybe our wetlands aren't as protected as they once were. And maybe tonight you will learn a lot more about wetlands, and you will feel inspired to become a louder and bigger advocate for our wetlands. I will share my contact information at the end, but if you have any questions as we go, you can pop them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. I know that we heard a land acknowledgement already tonight, but always important. So I would like to acknowledge that the land Ontario Streams works on is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and many bands of Chippewa. We know Indigenous peoples, they were the first stewards of the land, the first caretakers of the land. And tonight, while we learn a little bit more about our local land and water systems, it's a great time for us to reflect on how we can all be better stewards as well. And it's also a good time to reflect on how we can be better allies to our local Indigenous communities. So I hope you'll take some time tonight to think about how we can all do better. So as I said, Ontario Streams, we are a charity. Our focus is on restoring aquatic environments. So we are up to a lot of different things in a given year. And this little slide showcases our highlights of 2022. So we had 5 permanent full-time staff. We have 1 full-time contract staff and 1 casual staff. And last year we hired 5 seasonal staff. Our seasonal staff job posting will be going up in the next few weeks. So if you know someone who might want to join our team for the summer and help us out leading all of this conservation work, please direct them to our website in the next couple of weeks. We'd be happy to have them. Last year, we removed 240 garbage bags full of litter from our streams and near stream habitats. We planted almost 8,000 trees and shrubs over 2.5 acres, and we are hoping to do that again this year too. We built 66 habitat enhancement structures in our streams, which ended up improving over 600 meters of riverbanks. And I'll get into more details about exactly what a habitat enhancement structure is a little bit later in the presentation. We removed 11 detrimental in-stream blockages. Again, we'll hear a little bit more about that later. We had over 2,500 community volunteers and community members engaged in our stewardship and outreach programming. So it's a very big year for us. Finally back to doing a lot more in-person programming and having so many community members get excited about being outside and volunteering, planting trees, collecting litter with us. And again, we're always happy to have more volunteers. So you can reach out to us or follow us on social media to hear about our upcoming volunteer events. And we removed invasive species, specifically European buckthorn, that's an invasive tree species, from 0.6 hectares of land. So all of these different things and a lot more happened this past year. And again, looking to do it all over again this year too. Our focus at Ontario Streams is within the Lake Ontario Basin. So basically any river that flows into Lake Ontario. And sometimes we branch out beyond that, but for sure our core focus is here in the Greater Toronto Area. And that's where we're seeing those ever increasing threats of urbanization, as well as occasionally some agricultural land use too. Our focus is by watershed, like many different conservation organizations. And a watershed is basically the land in which one river and all of its streams and branches touch. So here in the Greater Toronto Area, we have 9 watersheds reaching from basically Brampton to almost Oshawa. And then we also have the waterfront, which is that dark blue, not quite a watershed, but Lake Ontario water does touch into that waterfront, of course. At Ontario Streams, our 4 priority watersheds would be the Humber River, which is the largest. It's the purple here. Oh, let me get the laser pointer on. So we've got the Humber right through the middle here. We have the Credit in the green, and then we also work on the Dawn here in the middle, and then Rouge in red. Those are our 4 priority ones, but like I said, sometimes year to year we do check out some of these other places and do restoration work there as well. So I just want to give a little bit of a visual here for some of these historical changes we've been seeing here in the Greater Toronto Area. So we are more or less on the Oak Ridges Moraine through here in Markham. Our big landmark that we're looking at is Buttonville Airport. And this line here would be our 404. And then the Oak Ridges Moraine probably begins somewhere through here. Not entirely sure, don't have the overlay on, but it gives you a good idea. And we are in the Rouge River watershed is what we're looking at here. And we see on the left an aerial photo from 1985 versus, fast forward about 20 years and some differences that we're seeing here in Markham. And we see on the left, we still have a lot of farmland through here, all of this green and brown. And then within 20 years, again, here's our Buttonville Airport for reference. And all of these new communities being built. So new schools, new homes, new shopping malls, all of these places, because of course, the GTA is pretty wonderful, right? There's a lot of people who want to live here and we want places for them to live. So as the population grew, our cities, our neighborhoods started to grow as well. And unfortunately, that meant less green space. And even looking back at 1985, right, these originally, if we went back another 100 years, 150 years, even this farmland wouldn't have been there, right? It would have been forests. So already in 1985, lots of land use changes from forests to farms. And then 2005, lots more urban development. And then let's fast forward to now, basically. And we've got, again, so much built up homes. We lost even some of this industrial sort of areas, again, all becoming more and more residential fitting more and more people in here. So how does all of that urbanization affect our wetlands? Well, what exactly is a wetland? And a wetland is an area of land that is either seasonally or permanently covered in shallow water. So in general, a wetland is not very deep. In general, if you were to walk across a wetland, you probably wouldn't get your hair wet. So again, not too deep. You probably wouldn't enjoy swimming in there, but you'd mostly be walking anyways. Wetlands are very, very good at retaining water. So they are great at reducing flooding, which would have been very helpful as we start to build up our cities. When we add more pavement, more roads, more parking lots, more sidewalks, all of that pavement creates places where the water can't naturally get back into our systems, right? When it rains, it hits the pavement and it doesn't have anywhere to go. So that's when we end up with a lot more flooding here in our cities, again, because the water has nowhere to go. If we still had a lot more wetlands, they would be acting as this big sponge. And once the water falls onto these wetlands, they just soak it all up and hold on to it, and they can slowly release that back into the system. And another part of wetlands is that they will be facilitating that groundwater recharge. So groundwater is the water that exists underground. And especially on the Oak Ridges Moraine, we have a lot of water stuck underneath this land formation, this huge land formation. So water naturally exists under the Oak Ridges Moraine, and there are spots across the moraine where water will naturally upwell, kind of like a spring where it just naturally flows back up into nature. So together with just these two things, we already know a lot about wetlands, but there's still a lot more to come. So wetlands, they have lots of plants within them that are very good at cleaning and filtering the water. So the roots of these plants, they can absorb water as well as any contaminants, pollutants, heavy metals that might be in that water, and they can remove it from the system without harming these plants, which in turn would improve our water quality. Over 20% of our species at risk in Ontario depend on wetland habitats. So as soon as we start losing these wetlands, 1 in 5 of our already endangered or threatened species are going to have even a harder time finding good places to live here in Ontario and be able to maintain their populations when they are already in a very precarious position. And unfortunately, based on our historical data, only about 10% of the original wetlands here in the GTA are still here today. So we've lost 90% of them. That's a lot. And again, that does link right back into those species at risk, already losing their preferred habitat, and it's likely going to continue to happen, unfortunately. So what do we look for when we think of a wetland? There are different kinds of wetlands, but in general, this is a rough idea of what we are going to see here. Some different kinds of vegetation, different kinds of plants that we would be seeing. One big one would be emergent vegetation. So these are plants that would be rooted in the ground underwater, but then they emerge out of the water into the air. So we're looking at things like cattails, bulrushes, some shrubs don't mind getting their feet wet and living in that emergent zone, but that's going to be right at the edges there. And again, we're not getting too deep, so it's not very much of their roots in the plant that's underwater, but just enough to get their feet wet. We also likely are going to see floating vegetation, so things like our lily pads that sit on the surface of the water, and their roots aren't really all the way into the soil at the bottom of the wetland, if they are at all. And then over here, we have submergent vegetation. So this would be the plants that live entirely underwater. So when we think of a kind of like a seaweed idea, where they're rooted in the bottom of the wetland and they don't emerge into the surface. Something to note is that there's sometimes trees and shrubs that live in or very close to wetlands. There are lots of trees and shrubs that, like I said, they don't mind getting their feet wet. So they can live in very moist and wet conditions, and they're still happy. That would be things like cedars. They are one that we often find near our wetlands. As I said, there's multiple kinds of wetlands. We have marshes, swamps, bogs, and fens. And I will go through those so we get a better understanding of the variety of wetlands that we are lucky to have. So the first one here is a marsh. And a marsh is a wetland that has very shallow water, and that water can sometimes fluctuate. So depending on the time of day, the season, the time of year, that can decide how much water might be sitting within this wetland. These marshes, they are fed from streams, rain or snow, as well as runoff coming off of our city streets or agricultural fields. So they have many different ways that they can get recharged. Marshes generally have lots of nutrients. They have very high levels of biological productivity. So that just means that they have lots of biological functions going on. So lots of photosynthesis, lots of decomposition. They are just working hard, constantly busy. In marshes, we generally see grasses, rushes, those shrubs that don't mind getting their feet wet, floating plants, submerged plants, mosses, algae. There's a real variety of different kinds of plants that would be found in a marsh. And marshes, they are very effective in droughts and floods. Again, they can handle these different levels of water. They can tolerate very dry periods as well as very wet periods. And these plants can just bounce back and either retain water to be ready for a dry period, or they can just start absorbing lots and lots during a flood. So we do have a lot of marshes around here. And that's really your typical wetland. When we do think of a wetland, we're thinking of a marsh. And here we see this one here is at Newberry Park, which is located right on the boundary of the Oak Ridges Moraine in Richmond Hill. This is, we'll learn a little bit more about it later, but it's nice to see we've got lots of cattails, bulrush sorts of plants. We've got our water lilies in there, some algae and whatnot, as well as our trees and shrubs in the background here, right on the edge. Then we have swamps, and swamps are different because they are going to have a lot more tree and shrub types of plants growing in them. So back in our marsh, we could see basically right across our marsh. However, with a swamp, we've got much taller and bigger plants through here, so you can't see, it's not really open water as much anymore. And we're going to see a lot of water in our marshes during the growing season in the spring, and that's when, again, we see a lot of rainfall coming through in the spring, and that's going to go and feed all of these trees and shrubs. We also have three categories of swamps. We have a thicket swamp, and thicket is just another word for a big collection of shrubs. So when we think about maybe like a hedge or something like that we might see in the neighborhood, where we just have a lot of very compact, closely packed shrubs, and those shrubs provide very good habitat for our birds. They're able to build their nest deep inside of these thickets or shrubs, and that's very good protection, as well as lots of food available for them as well. Coniferous swamps, coniferous trees are our evergreens, so thinking about especially our cedars, any of those trees that don't drop their leaves in the winter or in the fall, those are conifers. Like a lot of us may have just had a Christmas tree in our homes, and Christmas trees are coniferous trees. So in this case, like I said, cedars, they love to be in the coniferous swamps. They are very tolerant to wet conditions. Then we have deciduous swamps, and deciduous is the opposite of coniferous. So these are our very typical maple trees, oak trees, anything that would lose its leaves in the fall. So again, just three different kinds, and it's just determined by the dominant kinds of trees or shrubs found in these swamps. And these are really great to have near our rivers because, again, they help with flooding and they provide lots of different variety of habitat for different wildlife who would naturally be brought close to a river for access to water anyways. Then we have bogs, and a bog is a type of peatland, and peat is basically just decomposed organic material. So it's composting that's eventually going to be turning into a kind of soil. And bogs, we already see here, very different than the last two. These are very flat, not a whole lot of height happening here. And they are usually in a lower area, and they collect water from rain. They don't necessarily have to be attached to a river or near a river. It's just going to be an area that is lower compared to the area around it, and ends up collecting that rain or snow as it falls. Bogs are generally acidic in terms of pH. They have low dissolved minerals, and that just is in line with the kinds of plants that we would see here, and the kind of soil that exists. And generally here we see a lot of mosses in our bogs, and mosses are very good at sequestering carbon, getting that atmospheric carbon out of the atmosphere and into these plants, which is great for mitigating climate change. Because there's a little less variety here in a bog, they're generally not as biologically productive, but still lots of benefits because they are basically a huge sponge. Those mosses, if you've ever walked on a forest floor and you stepped on some moss, you can see how spongy it is, and it just soaks up all of that water. And then lastly, we have fens, and fen is kind of similar to a bog, but a little bit more variety happening here. It still has a peat base to it, and they receive water from sources other than just precipitation, unlike that bog. There's more dissolved minerals and less acidity, and again, just goes hand in hand with the variety of species and plants that we have here. And just like all of them, they have reduced risk of flooding and provide lots of habitat. So that was about 4 different kinds of the marshes, wetlands that we see here in the Greater Toronto Area and a little bit beyond as well, just to see what we've got and why it is so important and valuable to be protecting these different kinds of wetlands. So I know I talked a little bit here and there about all these benefits, but we'll just reiterate it one more time here to just remember how important they are. But wetlands, they are great at increasing biodiversity. We know that there's lots of different varieties of animals, plants, all these different kinds of living things that rely on wetland habitats. And the availability of wetlands is great. It's providing that habitat, but often wetlands can be connecting habitat between different kinds of ecosystems. So a wetland might be in between 2 forests, and now we've got a nice connecting point, which leads to decreased habitat fragmentation. So habitat fragmentation is just when our habitats kind of break off and get farther apart because maybe we do some development in the middle there, and we lose that easy access for animals to move in between these 2 systems. Talked so much about this, the improved flood management. So wetlands are great at just being that sponge. We talked about how their roots are able to filter out contaminants and pollutants and improve water quality. We talked about carbon sequestration. Oh, I got it wrong now. I lost it. But how they're able to take that carbon out of the atmosphere, store it within our plants, and make sure that we are mitigating the effects of climate change. And then another, just a fun thing that we haven't mentioned, but wetlands offer lots of recreational opportunities for us humans. There's lots of bird watching that can be done in wetlands. Maybe you can go for a canoe or a kayak through some wetlands or a hike. Many of the wetlands that we have in the Greater Toronto Area, they have boardwalks, so we can enjoy a walk through these wetlands without having as big of an impact on the wetlands that while we're there. And one final thing that I don't want to be the most important part of the benefits of wetlands, but wetlands do offer a lot of economic support as well. As natural infrastructure, because of many of these different benefits, wetlands contribute about $14 billion in economic benefits to Ontario every single year. So that's $14 billion of reasons why we should be keeping them protected and making sure that they are functioning as well as possible, protecting us from flooding. That's a big infrastructure issue that's happening across Ontario, and wetlands could have a lot of benefits there. So what are the threats to wetlands? As I'm sure many of us have been hearing in the news, lots of reasons our poor wetlands are under threat right now. One thing would be land conversion to other uses. So we see these big empty areas, and we think, oh, that'd be perfect for a new neighborhood. And unfortunately, it's then converted. Or it might be perfect for a new farm field, and then it's drained and used for another reason. We also are starting to see invasive species, or have been seeing invasive species in our wetlands. Things like Phragmites, which is a kind of reed, a plant, tall. I do have a picture later, but anytime that you're probably driving down the highway and you see these really tall grasses, and they have like a feathery brownish purple piece at the end, that is likely Phragmites. And Phragmites is very good at just filling an area. They are very tolerant. They can take all sorts of things, whether it's high salt content, low water, lots of water, and they can just take over an area, and then it outcompetes any of our natural wetland vegetation. We also see a lot of pollution, right? When we have so many humans living in one area, that usually means a lot more litter, a lot more pollution for the environment to have to handle. We know about climate change, and we might see very extreme weather coming, whether that means lots of hot days and droughts, or on the flip side, lots more rain, precipitation, storms, and both of those can lead to some uncertainty and instability in our wetlands. And then there's also this idea of stormwater management. So when we build all of these new neighborhoods on top of our wetlands, we're now having to accommodate and build some man-made, human-made infrastructure instead to now act as the sponge. And now these stormwater ponds, they're doing their job, but they're not necessarily the natural system that should be in place. So all of that we now know about our wetlands, what's being done to protect and conserve these very sensitive ecosystems? Well, in the past, we have had a system to evaluate and designate provincially significant wetlands. So basically, the provincial government would go and evaluate all of these different wetlands and decide on their value. Ontario, we've got 23 to 29 million hectares of wetlands, which is about 6% of all of Earth's wetlands right here in our province, which does feel like a reasonable chunk. And that is probably reflected in the fact that we've got Lake Ontario, or Great Lakes, the largest freshwater system in the world right here. So it makes sense that we do have a lot of wetlands, freshwater wetlands, relying or contributing to these watersheds. In Ontario, over 2,000 wetlands have been evaluated, and they are ranked in a system called the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. And basically, this provides a standardized method of looking at function and societal value, like those recreational values for the wetlands. And then this information can be used to make land use decisions. And wetlands, we know they change, they fluctuate, so the valuations can change as well. However, with recent changes in policy, it's unclear about where this system stands and whether this system will be used to continue to inform land use decisions and whatnot moving forward. So at Ontario Streams, we wrote a letter and submitted our opinion and our feelings about the changes being made to the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. However, last month, as well as earlier this month, the provincial policy went ahead without any amendments. So again, it's unclear exactly what is next, but this has been the existing policy. And to feed into our next slide here, in the past, the green belt has been a protected area, and it would protect our wetlands against any chances of development. And again, with Bill 23, these policies have been changed now, and we are going to wait and see what is next. And that's all I'm going to say right now. At this point, I'll just say that Ontario Streams, we are both privately and publicly funded. So we can voice our concerns, and we can voice how we would like policies to continue to protect our ecosystems, but there is only so much we can say. And some other government regulations. We have municipal bylaws in place, many different bylaws based on municipalities, but many of these bylaws include things like not being able to develop anything within 30 meters from a river or wetland. So that gives us a buffer area to make sure that we are thinking about those times when things could flood. There's bylaws around not being able to take water from our rivers or our wetlands to fill your pool, as well as not being allowed to drain water from your pool into a wetland or river, and of course bylaws around illegal dumping, so trying to protect all of these different natural areas. We have the Endangered Species Act, as well as the Species at Risk Act, provincial and federal acts that are protecting our species at risk, as well as their habitat. And as it stands, those are going well for now. And then we have the provincial wetland offsetting policy. This is a policy that was put in place to say that any time that we damage or remove a wetland, we are going to make a new wetland in its place. However, that new wetland is not going to have the same value, especially not right off the bat, to fully offset taking that putting development on top of existing wetlands. And then we also have provincial ministers' zoning orders, which also in the past year have undergone policy changes. And when created, these were supposed to be in place to act as ways to quickly protect our different habitats and kind of go around any regular processes for making changes. However, it seems as it's been a little bit flipped recently, and maybe more about getting things done faster rather than protecting our sensitive ecosystems. And then we also have municipal stormwater management. So through many of our different municipalities, through the GTA, things run pretty similar. So we have on the left what's called a catch basin or a storm drain, and basically the water that runs off of our streets, whether from rain or melting snow, it doesn't have anywhere else to go because it's all pavement. So it goes into these storm drains, and those storm drains are connected directly to our local waterways. It's not cleaned first, which many people are not aware of. So anything that we put on our roads or ends up on our roads are now directly in our rivers. And at this time of year, it's something to think about, that road salt, because there's been studies that show in the GTA, some of our rivers are as salty as the ocean when all the snow starts to melt. So that doesn't feel very good for our freshwater species. And then on the right, we have a picture of a stormwater pond being developed. And as I mentioned before, we're building those stormwater ponds to fill that niche of the wetland that we would have drained and built on top of to build all of these new neighborhoods. And now we do need somewhere for all of that rain and snow on our streets to end up back in nature. So we end up with these stormwater ponds, and though they are as naturalized as they can be, we still run into some issues with them because they don't necessarily have everything that the previous habitat had, and sometimes we don't see a whole lot of the old wildlife moving back into these areas. One thing that we sometimes see are invasive species in these stormwater ponds. We were part of a campaign in previous years around goldfish, and people decide they don't want their goldfish anymore, and they see this little pond in their neighborhood, and they say, that's a good place for my goldfish to spend the rest of its life. We put that goldfish into the stormwater pond, and many people don't know this, but a goldfish can grow as big as its container. So when we have them in a little 2-gallon tank at home, they're not getting very big. But if you go look online, there's lots of pictures of goldfish that are like 2 feet long. So those, they end up in these stormwater ponds, and then they cause their own havoc because they are not very kind to all the different plants, the aquatic plants that are in these stormwater ponds. So that was the policy side of things, and hopefully we see that sometimes it works and sometimes the policy needs some work. But let's look at how Ontario Streams is focused on restoring our local wetlands. In the past, Ontario Streams has been involved in both wetland creation and wetland restoration. So creation is starting from nothing or something that is not working. And in this case here, this is Newberry Park in Richmond Hill. I think it's around Leslie and Elgin Mills. Can't remember off the top of my head here, but the Oak Ridges Moraine does run right through here, and again right through here on this side too. This is our before and our after pictures. And back in the late 80s, we've got some new neighborhoods springing up in Richmond Hill, and they thought it would be great to have a nice community sports complex here, soccer fields, baseball diamonds, great for the community to use. However, as this particular park was located right on top of the Oak Ridges Moraine, there was a lot of natural upwelling, and there ended up being a lot of flooding through this park, which made soccer and baseball impossible because it was just all wet and squelchy and not fun, and also a safety hazard. So they couldn't do all that much recreation. And so by the early 2000s, Ontario Streams was contacted, and we worked with the City of Richmond Hill as well as the provincial government, and we made some plans and said, let's turn this into a wetland. And we ended up building 5 little one big wetland with 5 different ponds through here that are all a little unique and offer different habitat to different kinds of local wildlife. And within a few years of work here, we were able to get to this beautiful wetland. And we still maintain it to this day. So again, we've got on the left our before picture, all these sports. You can't see on the sign, but it says closed. And then now we have basically 5 of these big wetland ponds like this that we can see. And we've been maintaining these wetlands ever since. 2 years ago, we went and planted over 500 new trees and shrubs in this area, just again, constantly working to keep this habitat as pristine as possible. And then some restoration of wetlands. This work was done at Rouge Marshes, so right on Lake Ontario and in the Scarborough area. And here we've got, again, we see basically a pond, and we don't love to see a wetland that's just looking like a pond. It's missing a lot of plants and vegetation. So here we came in, we helped with regrading the shoreline. So we didn't want it to be kind of not quite a cliff, but very steep going into the wetland. So we helped smooth out the bank, and then we helped remove garbage, remove invasive species. We planted lots of native wetland vegetation. We installed some bird boxes, some osprey nesting platforms, and turtle basking grounds. So all of these different kinds of wetland wildlife features. And you can see over the course of the project, it now looks like this. And then last winter, I was there just to check in on it as well. And you can see still looking very good. We've got lots of the plants even in the winter going. And I believe just a few months ago, they were doing some new work on the parking lot here because it was experiencing some flooding. So we're just they're focusing on bringing that up as well. So looking a little bit outside of wetlands, but still on our aquatic systems and Ontario streams, a lot of our work in the summer is around erosion control. And erosion is what happens when we've got very fast moving water that's carving out our riverbanks. And we've got this fast moving water because after our rainstorms, all of this rain onto our pavement, into our storm drain, into our river, high volume of water moving very quickly. It just acts like a pressure washer or a power washer and just carves out the riverbank, and any of that sand or soil that was in the riverbank then gets into the water. And that's when we see that kind of chocolate milk colored water. It's not necessarily unnatural or unhealthy. A healthy system is able to bring it back to clear within a few days. However, sometimes if there is too much of all of that sand and soil, those sediments, it causes problems for some of our wildlife, some of our fish species. They rely on their vision to catch their prey. So all of a sudden, when we've got this chocolate milk water, they can't see their prey, and then they struggle to catch their food. So what we want to do is we want to help restabilize our banks, as well as give all of that sand and soil somewhere to settle back in and rebuild the bank. So what we do at Ontario Streams, our technique here is adding donated live Christmas trees into our riverbanks, and we secure them there. And over time, they will restabilize the bank, rebuild the bank, as well as provide some habitat and shelter for fish. So here we can see before, during, and after. So we've got this like very big erosion scar, right? We see all of these plants whose roots are just exposed. They have nothing to cling on to anymore. So that bank is just going to keep falling into itself. So we come in, and in this case, we actually use invasive cut down European buckthorn trees. So sometimes it's kind of like a 2-for-1 deal where we're removing invasive species and attaching it to the bank to help the bank, or we are using those donated live Christmas trees. And then all these little tiny holes and nooks and crannies will eventually get filled with all of this sand and soil that within 2 years, this is just 2 years later on the right, and we see that we've got a much smoother slope, and we've got all of this natural wildflowers and plants that just are able to naturally reseed into that sand and soil within the structure. And that's, again, the roots of those plants are going to hold on to the soil and stop it from re-entering the system too. So in a given year, or I guess in last year, for example, we built 66 of these structures, and that's over 600 meters of riverbank that's been restabilized, with the hope that in the next 2 years, it'll be fully rebuilt. We also remove detrimental blockages. So when we think about something that's in the river blocking the fish from being able to migrate or just swim up and downstream, these are generally quite large, and our focus these days has been on natural woody debris kinds of blockages. So not necessarily beaver dams, and these days we're not really dealing with human-made barriers, but I've had questions before that, like, what happens when this is in nature, right? In pristine nature, why are you worrying about this sort of thing? But the issue is in our urban centers, again, we've got all of this water coming off of our roads into our rivers, and it ends up flooding deeper into the forest, and all of that water, that moving water, can collect any fallen branches and twigs and logs and drag it into the river to create these very large blockages that don't really clear themselves, or it's going to wait till the next big storm, and that might just push the entire thing downstream and just keep creating blockages as it goes. So what we do is we come in and we very slowly remove all of these different pieces of wood, and we move them very far from the river so that the next time we have a big storm event, that new storm and all that flooding can't just pick up what we moved and put it right back into the river. So we'll remove it far away, and then hopefully in the future, it's farther away from the river, it's not going to re-enter. So here we see something like this. We would do this over a couple of hours. There's garbage in there. There's a lot of sand and soil and sediment in there. So we don't want all of that to just quickly re-enter the system. So we do this slowly, collect that garbage, get it out, and then, as I said, move things farther and farther away from our river. And we're working to improve water quality. So while we are working in the river, we are often using this strange thing called a sediment fence. So this is a human-made tool that helps us keep as little impact as possible while we're working in the stream. So basically we've got pool noodles on the top that are zip tied to a filter fabric. So it's just a mesh, kind of like a felty sort of mesh. And then at the bottom, there's a chain to weigh it down. And the idea here is that while we're stomping around building our structure and disturbing all of the sand and soil at the bottom of our rivers, it's not getting into the river as a whole. So it's just reducing our impact while we are hopefully doing positive things in the river. This picture's not as great because the water is moving so quickly anyways that there's already just naturally a lot of sediment. So probably not an ideal day for our sediment fence, but good practice trying it out and making sure we know how to use it so that on days when we have such crystal clear water, we're not here stomping around and adding more sediments to the mix. We also collect a lot of litter, so 270 bags of litter that we collected last year, lots of illegal dumping that we see, whether it's household or industrial, and just a good reminder for all of us to avoid littering as best we can, and maybe even if it's safe and you're able when you're out and about, whether in your neighborhood or a natural area, to pick up garbage as you go, if you can and if it's safe. We also work with invasive species management. So this year is common buckthorn. It was brought here with European settlers who wanted something that reminded them of home. However, it has done very well here in Ontario, and it's a problem because all of these berries, they are very tasty to birds, but they have very low nutritional value. So it's a lot like candy. And when we think of most of our birds here in Ontario, they do a nice migration to find somewhere warmer in the fall and winter. And when our birds fill up on our buckthorn, this buckthorn here, it's kind of like if you were going to run a marathon and you had a bowl of candy instead of a bowl of oatmeal, who's going to get farther? And unfortunately, our migrating birds, they have to fly across Lake Ontario. There's nowhere to stop. There's nowhere to refuel. So buckthorn does have a pretty big domino effect on impacting the ability for these birds to fly south for the winter. So we will pull it up from the roots. You've got to get it all out. It's very resilient. We will cut it down. The larger trees will saw and just get them out of the environment as best as we can. And then once we've cleared these areas, we go and we plant native species. So as I said, almost 8,000 native trees and shrubs that we planted in York and Peel region this year, and hoping to do that again this year, and hopefully with some help from volunteers like yourselves possibly. So we heard a lot about what the government is doing, what a charity like Ontario Streams is doing, but what about us as individuals? Well, one big thing we can do is avoid invasive species. So as I mentioned earlier, this is Phragmites. It's outcompeting our good native wetland species. It's just very tolerant and it doesn't mind conditions that other plants would prefer or stay away from. Phragmites is is sometimes available at nurseries or stores. So a big thing that we all can do is if we are planting in our own gardens or neighborhoods to only buy native species. Just avoid invasive plants, especially. They can spread so quickly that you don't even know what's happened. Our team was out doing some site visits today and found a whole area covered in periwinkle. Again, periwinkle is something that we would plant in our own yards, and it very quickly gets out of our yards and beyond, and then is out competing our native species. Things like trillium can't get up because we've just got these mats of periwinkle. On the right, we have a red-eared slider. This is an invasive turtle species found in the Mississippi that is now here. And it likely did not just get here on its own. The main reason that we have red-eared sliders here are because they are a very common pet turtle. And unfortunately, many people do not realize that, you know, if you're 10 years old and you get a turtle for your birthday, it is possible that that turtle could outlive you. Turtles can live a very long time. And something like a red-eared slider is a medium-ish sized turtle. Maybe it's about the size of a dinner plate when full grown. So that's a big commitment in terms of the space that you would have to provide as it gets older. And like I said, a very long life. And similar to our goldfish scenario, you might be wandering around in your wetland and you say, oh, I'm ready to get rid of my turtle, and this looks like the perfect place for my turtle to live now. And then someone might go and release the pet turtle into a wetland where it's now out competing for food and for habitat space against our native turtle species, all of which are listed as at risk. So just like any other pet, right? You wouldn't just let a cat or a dog go into the wilderness when you were done with it. So if someone has a pet turtle and they no longer want this pet turtle, it should go to the shelter, the pound, just like any other pet. And if you know anyone considering a pet turtle, make sure they're doing lots of research and understanding the commitment that they are making. And there are a lot of pet turtles available at many shelters for people who have done this. And so maybe instead of getting a new turtle, you look at adopting one instead. Talked a little bit about this, about how easy it is for things that we use in our communities to end up in nature. Litter, so much litter in our nature, unfortunately, and we should always be trying to remove it. Road salts, especially at this time of year, it's a good time to think about how much road salts we actually need. Really, you only need about 1 tablespoon per meter squared. So that can be a little experiment you try the next time we get some slippery conditions and see how far that 1 tablespoon will get you, and try and stick to that. Or look for some alternatives, things like gravel or natural kitty litter that can add traction rather than just melting the ice. And as we learned today, our storm drains, the water in there does not get cleaned first. So maybe the next time you're doing yard work or maybe cleaning your car, think about what sort of things, chemicals you might be using and how that could end up in our rivers and impact these systems. We know our 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but we've got 2 new at the top here. We have rethink and refuse. Rethink is about taking the time to reflect on the different products we use every day, the different activities we do every day, and really think about whether those are good for the environment. And maybe if they're not so great, maybe we can think about new routines or new products we could incorporate into our lives. We also have refuse, which is about saying no to those things that are bad for the environment. So maybe tomorrow night is takeout night at your house and they offer you plastic cutlery, plastic straws, and you just say, no, thank you. And you just wait till you get home and use the cutlery that you already have at home. We have recycle at the bottom now, and that is because unfortunately there's research that says that only about 9% of the things that we put in our blue bin are actually recycled. So that's about 90% of the things that we are feeling pretty good about are being wishfully recycled and are actually being put into landfill instead. Likely the number one issue here, or the number one reason things are not being recycled, is because of contamination. Things like our yogurt containers, peanut butter containers, soup containers, they all need to be empty and clean before we put them in the blue bin. Otherwise, if they are not, they are going to be sorted to landfill. So it does put a little bit more responsibility on us, but it's just those small tasks that we can do that make it that much more likely that we will get proper recycling out of these things in our blue bin. I don't believe we are voting this year, but that is not to say that you can't always be voting with your dollar and being an informed consumer and buying things that match your own values. So maybe the next time you're at the grocery store and you see some seafood that you'd like to buy, you can pull up the Seafood Watch Guide application on your phone, and it will let you know whether the seafood that you'd like to buy is sustainably harvested. And you are able to see some alternatives if the thing that you would like to buy is maybe not not as sustainably harvested. They'll let you know what alternatives you could be looking at instead. There's also some new research that shows that every time we wash our clothes, little fibers are falling off, going down our drains and getting into our natural bodies of water. And this is an issue because a lot of our clothing is made with synthetic fibers. So if you look at the label of your clothes and you see things like acrylic or polyester, that is just code for plastic. So unfortunately, we are ending up with all of these microplastics and fibers of plastic that are then being confused for food by fish and other wildlife. Some things we can do to help this problem would be to look at the labels of our clothes before we're buying and see if we really need to buy synthetic, or if we might be able to buy something made of cotton or linen instead. We can also look at buying secondhand and extend the life of products that are already out there so that we are not having as much pressure on the fashion industry to keep pumping out more and more, because plastic is cheaper than natural fibers. So that's why so many of these fast fashion brands, they want to keep making you buy more. And if you're anything like me, your closet is full. You probably do not need to buy anything new. So that's something that we can do and make that choice to take the pressure off of these companies from choosing a cheap alternative, and maybe start to think a little bit more about how they can make clothing that would be more in line with the environment. I'm sure we all know these things, but saving water and saving energy are always important. The average person in York Region uses about 230 liters of water every single day. And that might be hard to visualize, but about a third of that is through your bath or your shower. It's still early in the year. Maybe you're still thinking about setting a New Year's resolution, and maybe this year you can commit to taking a shorter shower. Something like 7 minutes is plenty of time to get everything you need done, and it'll be fairly quick, but still you'll just be a little bit more efficient in the shower. You might also want to commit to only doing laundry when you have a full load, and same with a dishwasher if you have one. And all of these little things can really add up and have that impact on our water systems and take off some of the pressure that we're putting on our local water systems. I encourage you to keep learning. There's so much that we can learn. You came here tonight to learn, but of course there's still more. I would like to share that I am doing a presentation with the Vaughan Public Library on February 21st on healthy urban rivers. So this one's all about wetlands, and that one will be focused on rivers. And we do have some recordings of our past webinars on our website as well. I've got 2 books to recommend here if you're looking to read more this year. One being The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, a very local book here about our environment connected to the Great Lakes. And then a book I read last year, a very good book, very easy to read and accessible to read, Inconspicuous Consumption. And it basically highlights every aspect of our life that we could be changing to have a better environmental impact. And there are so many ways that our lives are having maybe not so positive effects on the environment. One big thing being that whole idea of the plastic in our clothing. So that's a big chunk of this book. But even the amount of Netflix we stream can have an impact on the environment. So a lot to learn in there, and possibly fuel future decisions and routines and lifestyle changes for you. In York Region, there are lots of resources and webinars available on their website too. And they have some programs that if you have a property and you're looking to plant more trees, or if you don't have a property, if you're like me, you live in an apartment, there's also programs to help add plants to properties where there are condos or apartments. And of course, there's lots of ways that you can support local conservation organizations. So as I mentioned, at Ontario Streams, we lead community volunteer events. You can check out our website or social media in the future to see what's upcoming. And as a small charity, we do rely on lots of different funding sources. And maybe tonight, if you feel inspired about what you've heard, you might feel like you want to donate to Ontario Streams. And we do have a profile through Canada Help. So you can search their website for us there or on our website for that link. Well, thank you all for tuning in tonight. I appreciate your interest and passion in learning more about our local environment. As I said, we're on social media. We're at Ontario Streams on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And then I've got my email there, outreach@ontariostreams.on.ca. So if you have any questions or follow-up that you'd like to take offline, I'm happy to meet you there. And I will now check out our Q&A and our chat and see what's happening. I see Janet saying they love seeing a shot of wetlands without Phragmites, and we are very fortunate that Newbury Park is not experiencing any Phragmites, so that's a good sign for sure. Fiona's mentioning that they don't like buckthorn. Janet agrees. Lots of thank you. Then let's head over to Q&A. I see. What can we do as citizens to fight back against the provincial government's abdication of its environmental responsibilities rather than donating to conservation authorities and calling our MPPs? So I guess one big thing would be to attend webinars and keep learning so that we have the information we need to advocate and communicate about these issues. Beyond that, I would say doing some hands-on stewardship and volunteering when you can is also important. I know sometimes it feels like writing these letters, calling these people is not very effective. And I'm sorry, but sometimes it's all we can do, and we still need to feel so empowered to use our voice when we can, and then take action where we can as well. I see. Is there any risk of buckthorn resprouting along the banks used for erosion control? So we have not seen evidence of that. I know it is a concern. There's also often concerns about adding these coniferous trees into the river and possible impacts of acidification of the needles of these plants. But we are often, we're planting these trees, we're removing buckthorn and using them in the rivers in areas where the buckthorn already is, and they're already in that ecosystem. So it's not increasing the impact there, and hopefully over time removing these buckthorn species and plants from upstream will, and we move downstream slowly. That's our general plan. We'll be getting them out of the ecosystem, so we're not seeing that domino effect. And then same with the Christmas trees we're putting in the rivers. There are already coniferous trees in these systems, so adding these extra trees into the river is not having an impact there. I got another second question along that same vein as well about buckthorn in the rivers, and again, it's not having an impact that we're seeing. What do we do with the woody debris from stream blockages? Do you move it and randomly distribute it away from the stream, or do you make a pile for wildlife? So in that case, we are moving it far from the stream. Getting it out of the floodplain is the general practice, so that when we do see those very high flooding events, the water from the stream isn't picking up these pieces of woody debris and putting it right back in the water. In terms of making brush piles for wildlife, often we do that with buckthorn. So last year and this year, we were very lucky to get large donations of donated Christmas trees from the county of Simcoe. And so we've got over 1,000 trees last year and about another 1,000 this year, which basically covered all of our structures. So we didn't actually have to use buckthorn this year. So where we did remove buckthorn, we were making piles of like little bunny hideouts, we call them, where we just pile all of the buckthorn in a big pile, and then wildlife, things like rabbits, can make their little hutch in there. Previous owners planted lots of periwinkle. It keeps spreading. Is there a good way for removing it besides digging it up? I don't know off the top of my head how to manage periwinkle. I would recommend checking out the invasive plant species center. I believe that's or the invasive plant species of Ontario, possibly. Google something along them. They have what's called a plant me instead guide, and that guide there might have information about periwinkle. I know it's a great guide for if you wanted to plant periwinkle. It gives you a perfect native alternative. Periwinkle is a really pretty plant, and you might look for something that's blue or purple instead, and it gives you a good native alternative. What's the best way to find out about and sign up for Ontario Streams volunteer events? So you can check out social media and our website, and on our website you can also join our mailing list, and that's a good way for you to hear about any new things. Are you seeing any evidence of invasive bamboo as they're experiencing in New York State? I have not seen any of that yet, but I will make sure our team knows about that and is on the lookout this year. I haven't heard about that just yet. Okay, and a little bit more on the chat. Do you have any knowledge about invasive segmented vegetation in the Scugog area? I don't know about that, but you know, if you email me, I might be able to direct you to someone on our team. We are hopefully going to be starting to work a little farther north of our office in Aurora, pending funding, pending partnerships, but there's possibility of being able to work in Lake Simcoe watershed. So we might be up there, and we might see this segmented vegetation that you've seen. Yes, so I see a lot of people are excited and thanking me, and I hope you've learned something new, and I hope you're able to now share some of this knowledge with others, right? With our current events, we saw a lot of people get very passionate and excited about talking about wetlands and nature and protecting these systems more than ever. So that's great to see there's so many people on our side, and we can keep that conversation and momentum going, and by communicating all of these important values and benefits of our natural systems to others, and keep getting more people on our side. And hopefully, you know, I guess we can hope that like other policies, sometimes they go back in for revision. Sometimes things that get approved get unapproved later. So as long as we keep that conversation happening and keep taking our time to get invested and involved in these ideas and experiences, and hopefully that just keeps the ball rolling, and that our voices will one day be heard. But on that note, if you have any other questions after the presentation, you've got my email there, as well as Serena has it too, so you can contact her and she can send you my way too.